Hej och välkomna till den här intervjun som är kopplad till vår konferens om SeQF 5 år. Som ni säkert vet så påbörjades arbetet med att utveckla SeQF med utgångspunkt i den europeiska referensramen för kvalifikationer för livslångt lärande, EQF. EQF etablerades i och med en så kallad EU-rekommendation 2008. SeQF är kopplad till EQF. På så sätt skapas bland annat ett verktyg för att jämföra svenska kvalifikationer med kvalifikationer från andra europeiska länder. Och allt detta för att bidra till rörlighet för både studerande, studenter och arbetstagare inom EU. För att få en liten inblick i vad som är på gång kring EQF och i en del av de andra EU-länderna så har vi idag med oss Koen Nomden från EU-kommissionen. Koen jobbar på generaldirektoratet för sysselsättning, socialpolitik och inkludering. Koen, very welcome to this interview. I'm very happy that you are with us today. Before we go ahead and start talking about the EQF, I would like you to introduce yourself and tell us what you work with.
Yeah, thanks, Anna. So my name is Koen Nomden and I'm working in DG Employment, Social Affairs and Inclusion of the European Commission. And within the DG, I work in the unit that is dealing with skills, so the skills unit. And within that unit, I lead a small team that is in charge of the European qualifications framework for lifelong learning, also validation of non-formal and informal learning, also career guidance, and we are also currently working on the topic of micro credentials. Yeah, and we do this, of course, very much in cooperation with colleagues of the skills unit. For example, Europass is also located in the unit. And we also work across the Commission with many other DGs, including DG Education and Culture, but also DG Research, DG Grow. And of course, we do a lot of work with member states, like today, but also with stakeholders from education and training, from the labor market, but also from civil society.
Thank you. Part of your responsibilities is the so-called EQF Advisory Group. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so the EQF Advisory Group is a group that is officially advising the Commission, and it is responsible for the implementation of two existing Council recommendations. And the Council recommendation is adopted by the Council, so the member states, but it has the shape of a recommendation. So it's not legally binding, but still, as a sort of soft law, it is quite important because it provides direction on where member states should go, and they have agreed themselves, of course, to take this direction. The EQF Advisory Group follows up on two recommendations. Firstly, the recommendation on the European qualifications framework for lifelong learning that was originally adopted in 2008, and it was revised in 2017. And secondly, the EQF Advisory Group follows also up on the implementation of the Council recommendation on validation of non-formal and informal learning. And the reason why the group is looking at both these recommendations is that actually these recommendations are very much connected, because if you have a policy on validation, you usually would like, of course, also people to have the opportunity to obtain a full qualification, yeah, based on validated skills. And when you talk about qualifications, you talk about the EQF. And part of the work of the EQF has always been to look at ways in which people obtain qualifications also other than formal education and training. Now, just a word on the composition of that group. I think that's important for the way we work. The group is composed by representatives of member states, and there each member state is invited to have two representatives, one for the EQF and one for validation. We have, however, more countries involved in the EQF process, namely also the European Economic Area countries, and this includes Norway. I think this is important in the Swedish context, but also Iceland, also very important, I think, Scandinavian context, and Liechtenstein, but also the candidate countries to the EU are part of it. And those are mainly in the Western Balkans: Serbia, Montenegro, Albania, Northern Macedonia, also Turkey. And finally, also Switzerland is there, and two potential candidates to the EU are also part of the group: Bosnia-Herzegovina and Kosovo. Two additional words on this. Also, the stakeholders are very important in this context, and stakeholders from the field of employment, like Business Europe, or small and medium-sized enterprises. Trade unions are part of the EQF Advisory Group, and also stakeholders from the world of education and training, from higher education, from vocational education and training, and from civil society, like the European Youth Forum, the Lifelong Learning Platform. And the latter, of course, look very much also at validation, how that works and is implemented at European level.
Thank you. Very interesting. So let's start from the beginning. Why the EQF? Why did the EU start working on these issues?
Yeah, the EU started working on these issues. I mean, the purpose of the EQF has always been to increase the comparability and transparency of qualifications in Europe. Yeah, so across all the countries. And this is related to the fact that we have mobility of learners in Europe, and there is mobility of workers. No, the free movement of workers is a fundamental, one of the fundamental pillars of the European Union at all. And in order to have those freedoms function, you need also to strive to not harmonization of qualifications, but a better mutual understanding of qualifications from other countries. And we call this process transparency, so that an employer can better understand the qualification from another country, but also as an individual, I know better how to relate my qualification to a qualification in another country if I want to work there. So that's the reason why it started. A second objective, more a side of objective, but this has been followed up by quite a few countries, is that the EQF is also a driver for modernization of education and training systems. And we see in particular in Eastern Europe and in the Western Balkan countries that setting up a national qualifications framework often is done in the context of a broader reform of the education and training. But is really to support the transparency, and this has been done by creating 8 European reference levels for qualifications. Level 1 being the lowest level. In some countries this is, for example, the end of the primary school, and level 8 being the highest level, and a typical example there is the PhD degree.
Okay, this is very interesting, and as we know, the Swedish qualification framework very closely follows the 8 EQF levels. So we have a very easy way of achieving this transparency, which is good. So you've mentioned that there are many countries, not only the EU member states, involved in the EQF and the work with the EQF. So what is the state of play of the EQF implementation across Europe? How many countries, for instance, are involved as of now?
Yeah, so we had 39 countries, but with Brexit, this was reduced by 1 to 38. So that means 27 member states, the European Economic Area countries, EFTA countries, Norway, Iceland, Liechtenstein, that makes 30. Then we have Switzerland, 31. And then potential candidates, Kosovo and Bosnia and Herzegovina, make 33. And then 5 candidate countries makes 38, including Turkey, Montenegro, Serbia, Albania, and Northern Macedonia. They are all involved in the EQF process. They are also, all of them, involved in validation of non-formal and informal learning.
Yeah, so 38 countries now. Well, it's going to be interesting to see what's going to happen with the UK after Brexit, if they still want to be involved or not. Let's see. So what would you say, where are these countries at? Which countries have gotten the furthest, and which countries would you say have a lot more work to do?
Yeah. Well, when we look at the basic figures, I mean, a fundamental development under the EQF has been that nearly all countries have now referenced their national qualifications system or national qualifications framework to the EQF, and we are currently at just not having Spain. So the EU member states all have referenced, except Spain, and from the other countries, still Northern Macedonia and Albania need to reference. So 35 out of 38 have referenced. And the UK, of course, did also reference, depending on the Brexit deal or no deal. I mean, depending on that, okay, they will be either part of, not part of the EQF community in the future. When we look at the implementation, however, there is more than just having referenced to the EQF. What we see as a development is that all countries now involved in the EQF have developed or are developing national qualifications frameworks. And according to SeQF figures, in about 21 countries, the national framework is at an operational stage, meaning that it is not just existing on paper, but that a national framework is operating, that qualifications are being included in the framework, that quality assurance processes have been set up, and that there is a register of qualifications, for example. There are quite a few countries that are quite well advanced, and where nowadays the national qualifications framework is really a core element in qualifications policy, and also has a lot of impact on education and training. I can mention a few examples. Ireland has a long-standing qualifications framework. They are also now updating their referencing to the EQF again, because they had a lot of national developments. In Ireland, you also see, for example, that the labor market is more and more using EQF levels as reference levels in public vacancies. Also, the Netherlands is quite well advanced. They have included near 70 qualifications from the non-formal domain in their national framework. France has also a long tradition of the qualifications framework, has also recently revised their framework and moved from 5 to 8 levels, and this has been part of a broader development of setting up a law on lifelong learning that was done a few years ago. And also there you see a full integration of validation and the national qualifications framework. I think Sweden also, you have been always a front runner in terms of having non-formal qualifications included in your national framework. I think also Poland can be mentioned as quite an active country in the national framework that is at operational stage, and where, as I referred to before, the reform of the education system at large was done in the same time as the qualifications framework, so that's fully integrated. And then we have a few countries that maybe are a little bit further behind, but I think what counts is that even though there are different speeds, what counts from a European perspective is that for all member states and other EU countries involved in the process, the national framework is something that is playing a more important role in day-to-day life. There are still a few challenges, of course, also. Because especially for the labor market, this is not yet let's say, a standard way of thinking that is applied everywhere, and also for individual employers and citizens. They do not necessarily know the EQF so well.
Yeah, that was my next question actually about the challenges. So you mentioned the fact that labor market actors are not yet perhaps fully aware of the EQF and its potential. What other challenges have you seen from your point of view since 2008?
Yeah, other challenges we have seen is we see that in quite a few countries now, qualifications outside the formal domain are being included in national qualifications frameworks. Now, Sweden is a good example of this, the Netherlands, but also more recently, Ireland, Austria, Denmark have set up specific procedures for including these qualifications, which have in all those countries really labor market relevance. The challenge is, of course, how to see these qualifications next to qualifications from the formal education and training system, and how to make clear to the end user what is the difference. Yeah, I mean, a major challenge, I would say, in general for qualifications frameworks is to stay relevant as a tool for lifelong learning and for the labor market also in the future. And in my view, that means that you must be up to the realities of, in particular, the labor market and the education training field. I think also, communication to the end user is probably an important challenge in quite some countries. A third challenge we see is that internationally there is a lot of migration streams, and the EQF could be used as an information tool in helping to better understand also qualifications that are acquired outside the EU. And this is an important work because empirical data show that when non-Europeans are coming to Europe, and they generally work a bit below their skills level, and especially this is the case for those people who have qualifications acquired outside the EU. So these qualifications are not valued at the right level, we would say. And we are working on this also now with a project group within the EQF Advisory Group to see how we can use also the EQF there. A little bit better. And as I said before, the labor market. But this is maybe also a question of communication. And of course, if the EQF maintains itself as a relevant tool, and this is not just the EQF, it's also in particular the NQFs, the national qualifications frameworks, because I think for employers those are important. Then hopefully the EQF can play the role, let's say it could potentially play for the labor market and for lifelong learning.
Thank you. So if those are the challenges, and I'd say that we have the same challenges also here in Sweden, but what would you say have been the greatest contributions of the EQF and the emerging NQFs across Europe up to date?
Yeah, well, first of all, I think one of the achievements of the EQF has been that now all countries involved in the EQF are working on national qualifications frameworks, and those have as an advantage that they make the national qualifications landscape more transparent. And this includes in quite a few countries also qualifications that are not part of the formal education and training system. So without the NQFs, you wouldn't have the same level of transparency of the qualifications overall as without NQFs. Secondly, thanks to the EQF, the thinking about qualifications has changed. In the past, focus was more on duration of study. Now it's more about the learning outcomes, the skills, the knowledge, the competence you acquired through a qualification. And this is a major change of paradigm. And thanks to this thinking in terms of learning outcomes, also validation of prior learning, validation of skills acquired outside the context of formal learning has become possible. I mean, it's really thanks to the learning outcomes approach that, yeah, this has become a reality and is now, I think, becoming a standard in the thinking about skills. Yeah. Then also the EQF really has, and we can see this in national frameworks in several countries, has put the esteem of vocational education and training at a higher level, because thanks to the EQF, all qualifications are perceived from the perspective of proficiency of learning outcomes, whether they are academic or, for example, vocational or general education and training. And we see that this parity of esteem is really considered a major benefit of NQFs in certain countries. This is always meant in Germany, for example. So the university sector learns from the work-based learning and from the pragmatic approach of the vocational education and training world. But the vocational education and training world learns from the quality assurance approaches that are traditionally stronger in higher education. Yeah, and all together, and I mean, the idea we have is to create a map, a comprehensive map of qualifications in Europe. If we are getting there, I think the EQF will have succeeded.
Thank you. We often say that one of the purposes of the EQF and the Swedish qualification framework is to build bridges between the world of work and the world of education. Would you agree?
Yes, I do fully agree on that. And I think this is also mentioned, maybe not with the same words, but this is also clearly mentioned in the EQF recommendation. Together with other EU transparency tools we work on in our unit on skills like Europass, but also the ESCO classification. I mean, all those tools serve, and I would also say validation. All those tools serve to have better connections between the world of work and the world of education. At the same time, there is a challenge also there, because we work on the EQF in the Commission. We also see at the same time that the education sector is very often focused on the education sector only, and that the employment sector is very often focused on the employment sector only, on sometimes simple solutions without considering training or qualification levels. So there is also still a long way to go there, but the EQF, as you say, has been conceived as an important tool serving both, and it is still doing that.
Well, it's good that we agree, I guess. So what's happening next? What's coming up on the EQF horizon?
Yeah, so what is coming up next? We are, I think, currently working in particular on the implementation of the Council recommendation of 2017 on the EQF. And of course, now the context has changed. We have more digitization. We have, unfortunately, the context of the pandemic, of increasing unemployment due to the pandemic. What we are working on in the context of the EQF currently is the third country issue. Third country seen from a European perspective. It's not a very nice word, but it's the legal term that is used. So trying to get better mutual understanding and appreciation of qualifications between the EU and countries outside Europe. Secondly, I mean, I said that one of the core issues of the EQF is the referencing of the national framework or system to the EQF. Since the 2017 recommendation, countries are explicitly invited also to keep their referencing up to date. So that means if they have important challenges at the national level, for example, adding validation or adding non-formal qualifications or important legal structural developments to the framework, then countries are invited to update or to re-reference. And so far, this has been done by a couple of countries. The UK countries did it before Brexit, the Netherlands did it, Latvia did it, and Ireland and France already presented ways to do it. And we expect more countries to do that in future. And this is very important because it means that the citizen also will see what is the relationship between the national framework and the EQF. And this must be kept, of course, up to date. Yeah, communication is of course also a challenge, and another next step that I would like to refer to is that in the context of the new Europass portal that was launched on the 1st of July, the Europass portal will play an important role in providing that comprehensive map on qualifications, because one of the purposes is to connect the data registers or databases on qualifications that are created at the national level in order to interconnect those at European level, so that as individual or employer, or for example somebody working in qualification recognition, you can consult qualifications from across Europe. And there is also still a challenge because currently we have about 12 countries that are sharing their information on qualifications. So this is one area we are working on. Then what else could I mention here? Yeah, I think that was about that was about it.
Well,
yeah,
thank you.
And still perhaps to create, I mean, this is also an area of work to create still better links between validation and national qualifications frameworks.
So there's a lot of work going on and interesting developments. Is there anything else worth mentioning in regards to what's next for the EQF?
Yeah, there is. I think there is something also important that we are currently working upon and which has always been part of the EQF, but it was never entirely clear how to do it. So and this concerns the so-called international qualifications. International qualifications are qualifications that are offered by an awarding body in more than one country and that really are used in a number of countries. And then we talk about exactly the same qualification. Examples are qualifications in the banking area, also in the welding area we can call. And we are currently working with a small group of EQF Advisory Group members in order to agree on procedures as to how to notify between countries when a country has included such qualification in the national framework. Yeah, and the purpose of this is to make sure international qualification does receive the same corresponding EQF level in different countries in order to avoid that you have differences there that would confuse employers. And yeah, we are working on this right now, but as more and more countries include also those international qualifications as part of their opening up towards qualifications from outside the formal education and training, it's quite an important area of work.
Thank you. That's very interesting also. So this conference is about the SeQF being 5 years since it actually was implemented, since the law on the Swedish qualification framework was adopted. So what would be your advice to us here in Sweden for the coming 5 years?
Well, yeah. Thanks for that question. That I think is the most difficult question of the interview, and because of course I work on the European level, and we follow, of course, globally what is happening in the different national contexts. At the same time, we are not experts of what is happening at the national level. But what I think will be will be important, and I think you are already doing this, is really to implement, to focus, and to give priority to implementation of the Swedish qualifications framework. And we hope to see that you are very successful in attracting the qualifications that are not from the formal area and into the national framework, and to create transparency there, and also to make sure that all those qualifications that are included there really comply with all necessary quality requirements and become also transparent, to the end user. I think that is a key challenge. And then I think, it's also to keep the connection up between validation and the Swedish qualifications framework. I would see that as a major domain, and perhaps also if there are further important developments at national level that change somehow and that reflect the further evolution of the system also at some stage, I think you will need to do a re-referencing of the Swedish framework to the EQF.
Well, this has been very interesting. Thank you very much for your time. And I do hope that as we keep working on these issues, that we perhaps, when we celebrate the SeQF 10 years, perhaps we can actually see each other live instead of like this online. So again, very big thank you to you for your time and for your contribution. And I hope that the SeQF and the EQF will continue to add value for both the labor market and the education systems. So thank you very much for this interview.
You're welcome.